it's right there, and it's already going.
Yay!
So, and you just minimize that, and it'll run out of time. Or if you get that before, just hit, see the red light means, or the red dot means it's recording. You just hit stop if you're done.
Whenever we're done? Okay.
Yep. You're good
Can
to
you
go.
pause it to start recording then when because it's 30 minutes away before we start.
Yeah, she's been just
Okay.
editing it out
Yeah.
because
I'm
that
not
way
going to
they
be here the
don't,
whole time though, so what should we do about that?
huh?
I'll push
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll push
Yeah.
that.
Thank
Yep. I mean, and then it'll time out at the end, like,
If
You don't
nobody
have to worry
pushes
about
stop, it'll just end
Just
just when
yeah,
the
it'll
time
end at
is.
150
you.
minutes.
Awesome.
Thanks, girl. Hey, the guy who used the room said thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he's, I guess, subbing for somebody in the Department of Finance, and so he was meeting with a few students.
Yeah, it's great.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye, Carol.
Bye.
Right, great.
Oh, is it very big up there?
I'm wondering how that might impact our.
I'm thinking it will.
I think
I'm thinking it will.
we'll have a little. I mean, we have 30 some left, but the thing that is, I think some of the faculty have made it a requirement to attend at least 2.
Oh, that's good.
And so, we're kind of bumping up against the back end of this.
Yeah,
So,
they're doing.
So, yeah. So cool. So I'm glad things are going well with that. So tell me more about what you're doing with your internship.
Oh, yeah, so my internship's at Magdalene Serenity House.
Oh, yeah. We talked about this last time. Yep.
Yeah, and honestly, I love it. It's really holistic social work that we do there. So I do like individual sessions, I do groups, but I also do like case management stuff. I mean, I go to yoga, like I go to like equine therapy, like
Nice.
it's just a lot of fun stuff. And my supervisor, I don't know if you know her, Dr. Rand previously, but she is a doctor in social work school. But she has retired from the social work program.
Her name is Dr. Rand?
Dr. Rand, yeah, April Rand. I think it's a back road officially now.
Oh,
She's married.
Okay.
But she was working at social work school, and then she kind of retired from there and is doing program director role at Magdalene.
Oh, wow.
And so a lot of what I do actually is like outreach coordination as well, because like she's in charge of a program, and so she's my supervisor, so really whatever she wants me to do.
Yeah.
So like I like developed like a volunteer orientation presentation, just stuff like that as well, like some administrative stuff as well. So it's like
Good
I'm just like
experience.
all around social work, like just
And
do whatever you can do.
Do whatever you typical par for the course. That's how it works.
Exactly. So it's been really great, honestly. The women that are residents there are amazing. They've been through a lot, so it's great. Yeah. We actually use. Are you familiar with HARP? So HARP is like, I want to say it's like innovation and social work crossroads. Like
Really?
Yes, it's like an online case management
Tool.
yeah, for all of Northwest Arkansas, like every
Interesting.
single organization and agency that you can find,
Uses it?
yeah. Like they are on us in some way.
Is it like it's like people and anybody can access? So if you're at one organization, you can access a person's file and see everything.
So it's really geared around collaborative care. So like say one client seeing a physician at the community clinic where they're also receiving therapeutic services from someone at Ozone Guidance. Yeah. The two providers, if the client gives permission, can
Can
communicate.
access both.
Yeah, and they can kind of like talk.
Why do
Share
why
notes
does
that
the
are
medical
necessary.
field not do this?
Yeah.
Like really?
It's great.
Oh my gosh.
And it's really interesting too because typically these kind of like case management systems are developed. So
Yeah.
so it's like and it's doing really well. So
That's great. So people are. It must be pretty simple to use,
yeah,
right?
it's awesome. I can show it to you.
Yeah, I would love to.
Hi.
Haley Sinclair.
Are you signed up on Eventbrite?
Yes.
Is it Haley with an AI?
HAYLI.
Different.
Ooh, that is
Gotcha.
different.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Matthew Gallagher,
Are you also signed up?
expert one skills.
You guys are really good about it.
Wow, I love the creative
Very
spelling.
good to go. Thank you guys.
That's great.
So not funny.
How fun.
But yeah, I can definitely like show you one day. It's
Love
like
that.
super like technology with information, but it's also like helping social science.
It has to be simple. Otherwise, it would.
Exactly. It's definitely not to those.
Yeah.
So, because some agencies kind of run like the really like rudimentary stuff. Like we all use paper, you know, like that kind of stuff. It's all shit.
It shocks me that people are using it.
Oh my gosh, I would just made it forever.
You did?
It's called Best 3.5 years.
When?
The airplane one?
From May 2015 until August.
Yeah. Didn't just go.
Yes.
Is it still, it's not still sexual offenders, is it? It
So-
was a long time ago, I don't know when it
It's
changed.
similar. Well, it's just actually not after behaviors. So like some of them have committed like sexual offenses. Some of them are just maladaptive, as in like watching too much porn and like really young and doing things that are not like the correct age. So that kind of stuff. But yeah, I worked there for a long time.
Interesting.
So I work out there in social work actually.
So you worked there before you were even interested in, interesting.
Yeah, I was in psychology. Well, I did psychology, so kind of.
Yep, I did psychology and then I worked at a place in
It's like
Iowa when I graduated,
same thing.
called Boys and Girls Mental Health Care, where it has different residential wards and then different outpatient wards, and one of the ward that I worked on was
Just
just
two brothers, Texas with,
essentially 12 to 15, they lived on the site. So there was a house for,
Really? Maybe she was the other
Sexual.
that's what they called it, I'm like, oh god.
I know, it's really, it's interesting, and it's really rare because a lot of people just have this concept of like sex action.
Yep.
Yeah, but I have to be like, you know, it's typically because they're pregnant, so it's like
Typically it's there's a shop for it, yes.
It's insane work though.
It's insane work, it's
Hard
so heart-wrenching, yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's like really what it got my thinking.
Yeah.
Where we're going. I mean, we use psychology, it's just science.
Yeah,
You learn the theories, you
Yeah.
learn what it looks like, the brain.
not a lot of application,
Yeah.
right?
And I think that was kind of doing me a disservice. So when I got into it, because when you get a psychology doctor, you get to
See, that's what
No one told me
one
that.
of the things, right?
Nothing.
That's one of the things now that I'm like trying really hard on, like earlier, we're trying to establish some programming for young people, not to dissuade, but to encourage them to add on something to that particular degree, like something innovation related or an entrepreneurship certificate that will help them know how to apply the skills that they learn in a field like that, in a way that's more, yeah.
welcome.
Hi, how are
Did you
you?
sign up on Eventbrite?
I did, yes, for sure.
Okay, what's your name?
He's also just be able to see something.
You're interested? Thank you for coming.
Thanks. It's like cool.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, that's people coming. I know, right? I'm wondering how, yeah, I'm wondering how,
I know.
yeah, great. Hopefully our speaker shows up.
Hi, how are you
Is
doing?
it nice to catch up?
Did you sign up on Eventbrite?
Awesome.
What's your name?
Crank yours, correct. My mom back.
I got you. Thank you.
Guys, there's snacks and food out here if you want something.
There's
Drinks
some veggies.
Drinks and snacks and all that good stuff. Eliminators food, actually. I had a glass of that. It tastes good, it's really good.
I drink it until my last workshop.
I
Like, why did I do that?
feel like food really gross now.
I got all these. What did you say? What were the innovations you were talking about the athletic department?
Oh, yeah, well, so I decided not to do, one-on-one therapy as much as that, and I really enjoy working with college students. And so instead of,
Literally can't.
I work every week,
Or no, she would say dinner, she said
more
lunch.
kind of like every mental health field, I started working with psychologists, and I loved it, and I did it for a long time. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good to see you, my
You
friend.
too.
Oh my goodness, it's been so long.
That's crazy, huh?
Yeah.
You guys have been busy.
We have been, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have about 30.
Did you sign up on Eventbrite?
I did.
Oh,
Is that
so
what you-
okay. It's a rainy day, so I don't want to get your hopes up.
That's okay. However many stairs.
There is, we go up these stairs.
So,
And then turn to the
my wife
left.
there. So, I don't think you were
Hey,
here
how are you?
when I actually.
Great, did you sign up on Eventbrite?
I really.
No, big deal. What's your first name?
That's right. That's what these are. Yes.
Okay,
Okay, so you worked in the beginning. That's
How are
it.
you?
Yes, I was here at the beginning.
And what's your email?
Did you see everyone had a hard time?
Yeah, come on up. Do you have a presentation?
I do.
And where did you
log in, but we're gonna actually record this session.
Oh,
I don't know if
okay.
anybody talked to you about that, is that okay?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, and it's already kind of set to record, so you can email it, or you know what, you can just pull it here on the internet, right?
Yeah,
Can you get to
I-
like,
well, it's on my OneDrive.
I did
yeah,
offer to.
can you,
But I
like,
think I probably have to run
Right.
it through that.
Did you sign up on
I
the?
really-
Is this your account?
it's not mine, but I can log into like,
You couldn't find 16.
Okay, well, if I can do that too, then yeah, I'd be able to get
Good,
it.
thank you.
Really?
Oh, it's, yes.
oh, if we log out of this, it's gonna mess it up, right? To get his,
Don't worry that
email it to this, can you email it to McMillan@UARC,
I can't do that.
and then we'll load up his presentation.
That would be great, yeah, that's perfect.
Do that, and then we'll just go into the Outlook and receive it.
Nice save, I love that.
Yeah.
But I had sent it to radio.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I sent it to. Maybe it was.
Yeah, send it, and we'll just pull it up from there if that's okay.
Yeah,
Have it?
that sounds great, yes.
I should have told you this morning, why don't you email me the presentation so we can load it?
Yeah, no,
That would've been smart, that's smart of
you
you to
know,
do.
actually, I have my money, yes. And so I emailed her before that happened. She was.
Yeah.
Before that happened.
Or like all the guys.
Hey, how are you? Yes, absolutely. Did you sign up on Eventbrite? Awesome, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's tough, I'm so sorry.
Oh, what, like, so I went, I immediately then drove there. So
Oh, wow.
I had classes.
Okay,
So I had email.
I hope you didn't come back just for this.
Oh,
You could have definitely
oh,
cleared the
no,
schedule
no.
or.
No, and I had found somebody.
That's crazy.
I do.
He, I had asked him.
That's crazy.
But then when things changed, just
Yeah, he'll be back for class anyway. So when are you going to be heading for Monroe?
it's not gonna be for Memorial.
For Memorial.
Yeah, so then it's, not so November 10th. So-
Okay, okay.
so, they-
Sorry, that's,
Uh,
I know, I've been there, I just, it's still never easy to kind of,
Yeah.
even if it's like expected, it's still never something that
yeah.
is easy, you know? Hi, do you have a presentation? Can you email it to McMillan @UARC.edu? Oh, perfect, that'll work.
Okay.
That's what worked, yes.
You must be Tim. I'm
Have you guys
Jesse.
met?
Nice to meet you.
Oh, nice to meet you, so Tim is my new faculty member.
Great.
professor.
Yeah, I know the name.
Jesse
Yeah.
is, he's a tutor coordinator in the business communications. She's a very valuable resource, you should definitely
Oh,
connect with her.
You don't know how much I stress, right? You might have several
Yeah.
weeks.
Good,
Oh,
that's
my
good.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's almost a forgotten skill, and he's very, yeah.
Yes.
Hopefully not for long.
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep them. I'm trying to bring it to the forefront.
That's awesome.
Do I need to pull my stuff up now?
Yeah, you want to go ahead and log in?
I have to do one at a time.
It is McMillan.
Yeah, I think you clicked on that. Show it up.
Yeah, Which one is it?
Very bottom. Yeah, like my title.
Perfect.
I got there in looking for it.
Very, very simple, yeah. Okay, let's get rid of that, and then let's.
Try that.
It's weird to work this way.
Yeah. A little different.
I'm great as well.
I keep being like,
Do you happen to sign on the break?
yeah.
No big deal. What's your first name?
That's a good idea, but never happened.
Oh, there, sorry.
Thank you.
I'm starting to.
Oh, it had to be in the front, but I don't think I need that.
Let's wait just a few more minutes to start at 5:30. Do you want, let me get you guys some waters.
Yeah.
I can't believe that you were going to.
Okay, do you need plates or anything?
There are snacks in this room if anyone's hungry, and there's hummus and curry vegetables.
You want like, we can pass them out. I'm good. But thank you, I appreciate it. Oh, good. Oh my gosh, really? Did your wife make them?
Yeah, all my family has to eat that, so.
Oh, so you just do it by default, right?
Yeah, it's really good.
Do you have the time to memorize?
Oh, yeah.
I can be on Sunday real quick. That's what I said. Robinson's, how it sounds. What's your name? Is that yours? And what?
Oh, yes, I like that. Oh, wait, I always do it every single time. You bet. You are? All right, okay. Make it personal.
How many have you been to? Pretty much every one of them. I haven't been since that first day.
Yeah, okay, awesome, what's your name?
This is my third. Okay. How many do you have to have?
Hey, how are you doing? I'm great.
We have to go to every one. Our group is going to every one. And my other class at that pool. It's like that 4. 3 left.
Hey, there we go.
Did you watch the video too? I counted one. Oh, I missed that one. I forgot about this.
Oh, thank you so much.
Did not.
Great. Did you guys have any fun with it tonight? No, we didn't. What's your first name?
Did you read that? I love long Wednesday.
All right.
Oh, yeah, okay. I read through your.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. And then I used that analogy later on. I was talking to someone and I was like, yeah, we were talking about how to fill a gap or fill a need, and that one popped into my head and I used that.
I've always told my wife, I'm not going to make it, it's too hard, I'm not gonna get it till 5 in the morning.
Those are amazing.
Yeah, they do.
You said it in 3.
Yeah, I heard that's. Well, I'm just kidding.
You can't tell.
You can't, yeah, like that's how you know they're good. Thank you for tell her.
You guys, calm down. I wouldn't. I'm just doing it so we know. For me? Yeah.
These are Carol Beefs.
No, so a lot of these students, I think, are probably social innovation. So we're doing the next video again where students, groups from different classes are working on projects with the community. It's like kind of science. The solutions, kind of also finding solutions to the problems that they're posting and challenges posting on the website. So we can come up with an idea, evaluate sort of problems and then
Yeah. Okay, and that's what it was last year, but I know.
Yeah, so it could be a mix, right? We have several teams from the family. It could be a mix of anybody. Some students from social innovation, some of them village innovation teams, some maybe I don't know for sure. I don't see anybody, but yeah, it's been great. I'm gonna ask that actually. Probably several, but I oh wow, that's funny.
That was good.
Yeah. Okay guys, we'll get started in just a few minutes, but if you want anything to drink or some snacks before we get started, they're right behind you. That's back there. Pretty good lemonade.
A run. That was good.
Yeah, you haven't touched mine.
I think there's like 5 and like probably they look amazing.
It's a bonus for you? Yeah, that's it. You claimed it was a mistake. You always just clearly wasn't a mistake. It was everyone. That's what I was doing.
Almost missed a hand.
Okay guys, we're going to go ahead and get started at 5:30. Welcome to the Brewer Family Entrepreneurship Hub. Before we get started, we kind of want to get an assessment of who's all here. So how many of you are here because of the Social Innovation Program? Okay, quite a few. How many, what other groups are here? If you're not Social Innovation or Social Extortion. Oh, did everybody say something? Okay, great. Okay, so how many business majors? Oh, wow. Other majors? Biology? Anybody else? Okay, so this is very different than last year.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce, this is the Financing Your Project workshop, and we are very fortunate tonight to have Dr. Tim Yeager, who is a professor in the finance department, who has been here with the university since 2006.
Very good.
Is that correct? And so he is one of the most, I think, appreciated finance faculty. I know you were nominated as a ASG Outstanding Faculty Member a couple of years ago, so I think you guys will really appreciate his presentation. It's one of the ones last year when we did this that everybody really loved and appreciated. So I'll let you take it over, Tim. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Deb. Appreciate it. All right, so we'll make this interactive, and I'll ask lots of questions, and you can ask lots of questions, and especially give lots of answers and opinions. So We'll just dive right in. So I have a little something over here for all of you, but that has to wait until we get to my business. So just be patient, and then we'll get to that. So, is your innovation financially viable? For business students that are here, a lot of this might be reviewed, but you may not have pieced it together or thought through it as a whole like this. If you are maybe just in your first or second year of your studies or business studies, then there won't be as much review. But whether you're a business major or not, please ask questions if you have any, or I'd love to hear your comments and feedback. So, some objectives. Understand how financial planning fits into your business plan. Introduce some financial tools to assess your project viability. Build projected income statements and compute break even. We're going to do this all in an hour. Right? But as you'll see, this can be a high level kind of overview. Give you some examples. Build projected cash flows, sort of, balance sheets. Determine your need for internal and external financing. Understand the advantages of equity versus debt. Again, go through high level, very basic kind of stuff. We are not going to drill down into detail of these things, but we'll do this by example. Let's start with a hot topic in the news. Is Tesla financially viable? Show of hands. Yes, they are. We have one believer. I'm glad Elon Musk is not here. He'd be really upset. How many say they are not financially viable then? All the rest of you. Very interesting. Okay. So we have a lot of skeptics here about Tesla. And I think it's healthy to be a skeptic many times about Tesla. The right answer is we don't know, right? We will wait to see. I think if I were sitting in your chairs, I would be skeptical as well. But yet, there seems to be some way, somehow, that the company and the CEO keep churning, keep moving on. And they just announced positive profits for the first time. When was it? Today? Yesterday? Was it just yesterday? Okay, so anyway, if you're going to be financially viable as a startup, you must differentiate your product. How is it going to be different? How are you going to derive market power? How are you going to sell your product more than, or at a higher price than, your competitors and sustain your market share? You eventually have to earn consistent profits. You have to sell more. You have to cut your costs. You have to charge higher prices or some combination of these. You need sufficient cash to pay your expenses. You can't pay your bills, you're going to shut down. Right? You need your cash. And you have to eventually become solvent so that your assets exceed your liabilities. Right? And if you have a bad year, all of a sudden, all your debtors don't come asking for their money back right away. Okay? So, look at Tesla. Do they differentiate their product? Oh yeah. How do they differentiate? What's Tesla's niche? Obviously, electric. Is that what you're going to say?
I would say electric, yeah.
Okay, good. So they have an electric car, and that's an emerging segment of the car industry. But the electric cars have been around for a little while. We would hardly know it because the market share is small. But they've been around a little while. What else does Tesla do that's a little different?
Yeah, I think that part of Tesla, at least at this point, since there is so much debate on whether they're financially viable, is when someone buys a Tesla, a lot of times at this point they're buying into Tesla's, like, what Tesla stands for and more like what Elon Musk stands
What
for.
does Tesla, I think you're exactly right. What does Tesla stand for?
Well, if I remember correctly, they've kind of been trying to work as the moneymaker for Elon Musk, as well as SpaceX, but the help is more.
But see, more, I guess, more superficial. If you buy a Tesla, why would you buy that car instead of another electric car? Take a look at the pictures.
Because they're cool and they're not Priuses and they're fast.
They're cool.
And the
They're
inside of them, they're all technical and stuff.
very technical.
More personal.
Expensive. And so they're not appealing to low-income buyers, are they? So they were the first ones to make buying an electric car cool for people who have money, which is smart because electric cars are expensive, and at least currently, and more expensive than traditional cars. So if you're going to market your cars to someone, you may as well go after the people with money, right? So they're the Apple of the cell phone market. They go after sort of the niche. It's a status, right? So I have a Tesla, right? So I'm a doctor, right? But for me, I'm the wrong kind of doctor. I don't have a Tesla. You have to be a medical doctor. You can afford one of those guys. All right. Okay. So financials can give us a lot of clues about how the firm is doing, its condition, and so on. Let's just take a look at some of the recent financials, and I'm getting this all off of their SEC statements. And so you look at their income statement. And again, non-business majors, their revenue means how many sales they're making, right? The dollars they generate from sales. It's not their net. And then they have cost of goods sold. We'll get their gross profit. We take out all other expenses. I'm greatly simplifying. And then we get net income. And you have the parentheses around it. That's bad, right? It's not good. That means negative. And so negative 675, these are in millions, right? So negative 675 million 2 years ago. Negative 1.9 million. First half of 18, negative 2.7 million. So not only is it negative, but the trend is not great. Now, I don't have the third quarter numbers, and that would show positive income. I believe it was positive net income. I'm not sure, but I think it was positive net income. And that would make that a little less negative. But nevertheless, $2.7 billion in losses in the first half of the year doesn't inspire a lot of confidence, does it, right up front? You need a little more knowledge, though. How are they getting the cash for their business? Well, here's their summary of their cash flow statement. In the first half of 2018, cash from operations, negative $319 million. That means that the process of making cars and selling cars have drained it of $319 million in the first 6 months. Cash from investments, negative $3,791 million. And that is coming from their expansion of plant and equipment, making sure that they have the capacity to produce cars, right? So investment in their physical, mostly physical assets. And so that's draining cash, right? Because to expand and maintain and so on takes cash. Cash from financing, $3,158,000,000. So, and most of this is debt. So basically, they're borrowing all of their cash, and they're burning more cash in investing and operating than they are in borrowing. So the cash is falling, and it fell by $953 million so far. Now this was 2000. No, that was the first half of 2018. My apologies. I updated these numbers, and I didn't update that one. So that's for the first half of 2018. Okay. What does your balance sheet look like? Assets are things of value that the company has. So they could sell their assets, presumably, $27.9 billion. Liabilities, $22.6 million. They have actually positive net worth on their balance sheet. That's what they show. Okay, $3.9 billion. And what's the stock market think about all of this? Well, the stock market has been mixed, but in general, it's been pretty optimistic, right? Their stock price has been high. At times, I'm not sure if it's still true, they have had more equity capital than General Motors and Ford, I believe both of those, which is kind of odd for a company that doesn't produce a whole lot of cars and it's a very niche product. Okay? New entrant into the automobile industry. Stock prices were about their highest at 383 in June of 2017. As of what day was this? October 22nd, it was $260.95. So it has fallen since then because they declared a profit. Everybody's ecstatic, right? So wow, the company has a profit, and so the stock market went up again. And I couldn't tell you how it closed. Maybe some of you know. I don't know. Does anybody follow that? Anyone know what their stock price is? I thought we could find it in about 10 seconds. It'll take me about 10 minutes on my phone. You guys are fast. All right. So anyway, the stock price is pretty good. So back up for a second. So it's a mixed story, right? So the financials that we're getting from Tesla are mixed. They're not making money. They're draining through their cash. They have positive equity, and their stock price is still very strong, even if it's been trending down. So what are the clues that this might lead us to? Well, in this case, it's kind of messy, isn't it? And I think, as even in our own opinions here, a lot of us are very skeptical that this company is going to make it. I tend to think that at some point, Apple might actually step in and buy this company if they really start to have serious financial problems and they can't come up with cash, or at least partner with them. Because that would kind of make sense, right? You have sort of the elite cell phone operator, producer, merging with this elite and tech company too, and merging with this elite electric car company. So it might be one possibility, and I wouldn't put it out of the picture that might happen someday. But the financials are conflicted, and so we're conflicted. And people who are buying their stock are taking a bet, hey, that they're going to make it through. And there's a lot of people who are shorting their stock saying, no, it's going to fall. And they're not optimistic about that, right? So not real clear. When you start up a business, or when you are thinking about starting up a business, you face the same dilemma. Your project might make it, your project might not. And so you need to think very carefully about the financials of your business and be as realistic as you can in making projections going forward. And that way you're more prepared. You will never forecast correctly. You will have errors, sometimes big errors. But at least then you plan through and you know where those forecast errors are coming from, and you can adjust as you go through. Okay? So you have less surprises, less things that sort of knock you off your feet, and you can keep your business going. You can keep your line of sight more focused than maybe you otherwise could. All right, so I have a business plan. It is a great idea, as you can see. I will open up my own bakery. And what I mean by my own bakery is my wife will open it up and do all the work. And she's going to open up on January 1. It will specialize in gluten-free cupcakes. Why? Because every one of my 4 children and my wife have to eat gluten-free. I'm the only one that loves gluten. Right? I'm glutinous. But still, over the years, she has learned how to bake gluten products so that you can barely tell the difference. Right? I was almost going to do a taste test, but decided I better not. Plus, then I have to have her make both kinds of cupcakes. So I'm going to sell cupcakes, and they're each going to cost me $5 to produce, and I'm going to sell them each for $10. And they're worth it. And I'm going to make $5 profit on each cupcake. I'm going to sell $10,000 per month, and earn $50,000 in profit every month. So obviously, I am going to be rich. Right? Isn't this a great idea? Wait a minute. I see some skepticism. Yeah, let's think about this a little more carefully. $10 for a cupcake? That's high. Unless I'm in like San Francisco or New York or something like that, then it's low. Right? 10,000 cupcakes a month? Who am I going to sell to? That's a lot of people. I eat that many, but most people don't. So maybe I better go through and think about these more carefully. So while you're thinking about this more carefully, come on up if you're interested. There's about almost 30 of these cupcakes. And they're gluten-free cupcakes, and my wife made them. And they have tons of great icing on them. So take a break, go up, grab a cupcake, come back, get a napkin, sit down. If there's more than 30 people, then or 29, then you might have to share. There it goes. Everybody get one that wants one? There's still 4, 5, 6 left, right? Come on up. Don't be shy. Okay, so as you're eating these, can you tell they're gluten-free? Not really, right? I mean, I think if you ate one side by side, maybe you could tell. You really can't. Part of the trick is, boy, you just put so much sugar on it. In terms of icing it, it just covers up the taste. But my daughter first had a baby, I don't know, oh gosh, 9th grade, maybe 10, 12 years ago, had to start eating gluten-free, and there were no options back then. And gluten-free tasted awful. And over the years, as more people have become aware of the sensitivity and so on, then the market has exploded. But do you see a gluten-free cupcake company anywhere? I don't. Right? Now, my wife doesn't really want to go into business. I always tell her she should. I'm not going to do that. It's too much work, and it is a lot of work. So she's not going to do it. So if you guys need an idea, like you're all coming here, I need a great idea. Well, here you go. And I really think not just cupcake, but if you do broader gluten-free thing, I really think it might work. But you can't sell them for $10. So let's go back and do a little revision. Let's think more carefully about this business plan. So you put together a business plan. How many people know what a business plan is? Just a couple. It's a document that forces you to organize your thoughts, right? And we're doing just a little bit of this. One of the key components of a business plan is the financial piece, and that's really what we're walking through very quickly. And so it forces you to logically think through the financials and what you might expect. Okay? Often used as a pitch to investors for financing. You're not going to convince people to invest in your business or lend you money if you do not have good, solid fundamentals for your business. So going back to Tesla for a minute, that's another reason that it's kind of interesting that Tesla has been as successful as they have for this long, because Elon Musk tends to always exaggerate and overpromise, right? So he may deliver eventually, but it's always late, always. But the market doesn't seem to care. He's too cool to care. Okay? So he's got that figured out. All right. So in any event, we're going to focus on the financial aspects of a business plan, looking at financial planning. So what is going to distinguish my cupcakes from the market? Well, number one, they're gluten-free. But other people can make gluten-free. So I just happen to also be a great baker. Right? That's my real niche. I am just a horrible baker. But my wife is a great baker. And so between the two of us, maybe we can pull this off. No bakeries yet specialize in this product in my area. It's going to give me some market power where I can price over my costs and potentially make sustainable profits. Okay, so even if some new competitors emerge, then my product will still be unique because it's going to taste better than the competition. That's the idea. So, first thing I might want to do is figure out what my sales might be, and my costs might be, and my revenues would be, and my income would be. And so here is a quick take at all this. So I can sell, now you guys have the minis, those might go for smaller amounts, but the regular cupcake, $3, right? So I'm going to open up my store for $3 each. I'll sell 100 cupcakes per day. Maybe that's correct. I don't know. Maybe that's realistic. I'm just making the stuff up. But I tried to make it up where it's a little bit realistic. You can see yourself selling 100 cupcakes a day in the first year, and then it'll double to 200 a day in the next year. Right? As word of mouth gets out and advertising. My cost is going to be $1.25 to make each cupcake. That's the ingredients, including the labor, and maybe even, depending on how you do it, including some of the utility, part of the utility bills and that kind of thing. And so you subtract the cost of goods sold from your net sale, you get your gross profit, and it's going to be $61,250 in the first year. I'm open for 350 days, by the way. I am going to have overhead expense. I need to advertise. I need to do bookkeeping. I need to pay the rent. I'm not going to buy my building yet. I'm going to rent and make sure this thing works. I have to have a salary, right, to live on. And so those are all going to come to $90,000. And then I have to invest in some equipment. I need some ovens. I need some washer, dryer, a sink, counters, dishwasher, things like that. And so those are $25,000, which probably is kind of light, but nevertheless. We had to go replace our refrigerator. You can't even buy a regular refrigerator anymore for like under $2,500. And whereas refrigerators used to last like 30 years, now it's like, hey, this is a class refrigerator. It's probably going to last you 8 to 10 years. Oh my God, really? They're also high-tech and fancy. We've lived in our house 13 years. All of our appliances are on the second generation. All of them. And some third. So you don't get what you used to. They look better. They just don't last very long. And anyway, little side story. So you have your equipment. No tax first year. And you're going to have a loss. And this business is going to lose $53,750. Now some of you who have accounting, you're saying, well, wait a minute, this equipment is really a capital investment, has to be depreciated. Yes, you're exactly right. We're going to just simplify and say 100% depreciation. So basically, you're going to pay it all out, today, and it all depreciates in the first year. So what you pay is the expense. In the second year, because I am selling more, my SG&A expenses are the same, but I have more gross profit, and I have less capital investment the second year. And I'll pay no tax because I've offset from the first year. $29,000 is my net income. So, in the second year, I'll be profitable. If these numbers have any semblance to reality, right? Which is what you're trying to do. Trying to make sure they're somewhat resembling what really might happen. So, how many cupcakes would I have to sell, to produce and sell, in 2019, in this coming year, to break even? So, we'll look at the break-even analysis for this. And it might seem complicated at first, but it's really not. All you have to do is say, look, what are my costs going to be, which means my fixed costs and my variable costs, and how much revenue do I have to make to equal those costs? So, what are my costs? Well, I have $115,000. These are the fixed costs. These don't change depending on how much I produce. I've got to pay my rent every month, whether I'm open or not. I have to pay my salary, whether I show up or not. I have administrative, bookkeeping, and all those expenses. And the equipment expense, you buy it, you have that expense, right? $115,000. My variable costs vary with the product. So I make one more cupcake, I pay another $1.25. So my total costs are $1.25 times my number of cupcakes that I'm going to produce, plus my fixed costs. And my total revenue is $3 times however many cupcakes I produce. So you've got number of cupcakes in both equations. You have to do some algebra, and you solve for the number of cupcakes. And the break-even number is $65,714. Not dollars, cupcakes. So, how many cupcakes am I going to sell first year? 35,000. That's why I've got a loss. If I broke even, I would need $65,714. Now, it doesn't matter so much if I don't make a profit the first year if I expect to be making profits relatively soon. And that depends on the industry. Relatively soon in pharmaceuticals might mean that you finance 10 different businesses, 9 of them fail miserably, and 1 of them succeeds and makes a ton of money. But you don't see the feedback for or that return for like 12 or 15 years. Right? So it depends on the business. We're not going to wait that long for cupcakes. No, we need to return much more. Right? We can't wait 12 or 15 years. So what's going to happen to my cash? I am going to lose $53,750 in cash. Those are all cash expenses. And therefore, I need to be able to invest let's say $60,000 of my own money into this business. Now, I could also borrow, right? So I could borrow half of that or even more than half, just depending on what the market is, but how credible people think my business is, right? And the condition of the economy and so on. But my cash balance at the end of 2019 is $6,250. Now, if I start making a profit in the second year, I can probably squeak through. Okay? So I need to know what my income is going to be so that I can sort of back out, well, how much cash do I need so I can survive? And how am I going to get that cash? Will I be solvent after first year? Well, let me ask you that. Will I be solvent after the first year? Will my assets exceed my liabilities? You can see the answer up here, and it shows, yes, actually I will be, but I have a loss. Why am I solvent still? Why do I not have negative net worth? Now, this is the business. So not me personally and the business combined. This is only the business. Yeah.
You don't have any outstanding debt, and you have all the money that you put in invested in the business.
Yeah. So I'm ignoring the debt that the company has to me personally, right? And saying, look, I have $60,000 of equity to start with, and even though I'm losing a lot of it, at the end I still will have some left. And I can always sell my equipment. So I have assets. I'm going to have, at the end of the year, $6,250 in cash. I'll have $25,000 in equipment. I'll have $31,250 in assets. What are my debts? None. Because I haven't borrowed any money. So my equity is the same as my assets. Now, if I borrow half of that money, $30,000, boy, now I'm really close to break even. Okay? So one advantage of putting equity in the business instead of debt, and there's certainly more than just this, but one advantage is that you are far more flexible in your operations, so that you don't need to be paying interest expense to others. Now, you may not have $60,000 to invest, and so you need to borrow some money, right? And so it depends on the trade-off between that. But we'll talk a little bit more about this in just a second. How might you go about? So you all are looking at entrepreneurial plans. Either maybe you're creating your own, or you were assigned some, or you chose some, and you have to go through the concept and look at it from lots of different angles, right? Maybe technological. Will it actually work? Maybe biological, maybe scientifically, does this make sense? You have to look at it from a marketing point of view, from an advertising point of view. Are you going to be able to sell this? Is this a viable product? But you also, as we're discussing, need to look at it from the financial point of view. And one of the important questions is, do you need to get external financing? Okay, so does anyone, I don't know how far along you are in your projects. Can anyone share without revealing any information you're not supposed to reveal? whether your company that you know, as far as you know, has to have external debt, or maybe they already have external debt, or they're doing all just internal funding. Anybody know? Don't know yet? Yeah.
Ours has internal funding.
Okay.
Through the city, actually.
Okay, so it's all internal funding through the city, but they don't have to pay it back.
Correct.
So it's like a grant or something. That's even better, right? So you have internal financing. So internal financing, the finance theory will tell you that under certain conditions, it doesn't matter if you have internal financing or external financing. But that ignores a lot of real world realities. And if you can rely on internal financing, you have your own funds the owners have put in there. Biggest thing is you keep all the ownership, you keep all the profits, you make the decisions. Right? You don't have to, if you sell 51% of the shares to outside investors, you might lose control of the decision making. Okay, so yeah, you need the funds, but you know, every time that you give up equity ownership, you are giving up future streams of revenue for that business. Okay, and so it's something that you should be reluctant to do unless you really have to. Okay, unless there's no way you can get around it. And many times, probably most of the time, that is the case. Most of the time, the scale is too big. You don't have the money. It's too complex, and you need to partner with others. Okay? But it's not something you should give away easily. A lot of times, people who start a new business, they think, I need cash. Oh, well, this person can do great accounting. Yeah, they're really good at accounting, and I'm terrible at accounting. So, yeah, you come on and do accounting, and I'll pay you some money, and you get 10% of the business. Well, really? 10% of the business for doing the accounting? No, go hire an accountant, right? Pay them to do it. You don't need to give them a share of the business. People you give a share of the business to should be people who can help direct the business, help, creatively think about the direction, the product, the market niche, whatever, the technology, whatever it might be. Things that you can't just pay for in the labor market to get, right? So you don't want to give up that equity. So if you need funding, what's the other way to finance? Well, you could go the debt route. Bank loans or bonds, for example. Bank loans, usually smaller companies, will rely exclusively on that form of debt. Bigger companies can issue their own debt, their own bonds. And here, you're on the hook contractually for principal and interest payments. They're legally required. Right? If you miss them, in bankruptcy, they can be settled and taken back. The interest expense, however, is tax deductible, so you can benefit from that. But you keep control. Right? You keep control of the business. And so debt might be a good way to finance your business. So you're thinking through, well, I'm not going to have enough cash to do this. Well, the pecking order theory of finance says, look, you start with your own internal cash first. And then, if you can't meet your needs there, you can move to debt. Right? But at least you still retain all the profits, and you retain all the controls. And then, if you can't meet your financing needs there, now you move to equity. Right? So, I think that's a very helpful way to think about things. Public equity for big companies, even small companies, if you're going to have equity, you can just sell the shares, but usually it's more informal exchange. But in a public equity, you're going to sell shares that are listed on exchanges. But no matter what, it dilutes your ownership, your control, and your profits. The dividend payments are not necessarily, it depends on your corporate ownership, tax deductible. But the dividend payments are also not legally required. So if you need cash and you can't pay dividends, you can cut the dividends. There's no legal recourse, right, for the equity owners. So it gives you some flexibility that way. And of course, most people that go into business for themselves little salary or certainly very little equity in the first years. And they work really, really hard, long hours to get things over the hump and get things to work. Right? So a lot of sweat equity in a sense goes into that. Don't make the mistake of in your finance planning of saying, oh, well, we can sell shares for half the company and we'll raise all the funds we need. No, think harder than that. Right? In some ways, that's the simplest solution, but it's the most costly in many ways, right? So you want to think harder about that. All right, so I've talked through my wonderful cupcake idea, and what we've done here is touched on a lot of different facets, right? But what it comes down to is you taking time to stop and carefully think about the business. So you are assigned, I don't know, can someone give me a topic? What are you, if you're allowed to say, what are you working on? Give me a topic of your business. Is that something that's confidential or not?
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's just, what's your project? I think he's wanting to know. It's not about what you're working on projects. What's your project?
Yeah, basic idea of what your project is. Any volunteers? Yeah.
Mine is a diversity and inclusion book series.
Okay, diversity and inclusion book series. Do you know who the authors are?
Not exactly, not yet.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out if it's even viable.
Okay. And so tell me how you might think about doing that.
Well, one thing I was thinking about is, and it costs a lot of money to just do normal physical publishing.
Mhm.
So I was thinking of maybe putting it online. That way we can bypass kind of like the whole publisher and the whole
Okay.
kind of all that kind of stuff. You can kind of put it up for free. The only problem is it kind of hurts its kind of viability when it's on the internet, because some things on the internet's not true. So so I was thinking of maybe getting different professors and highly educated people to kind of sign off of it, so it can be more like a kind of like a scholarly work.
Okay.
And then after doing that, maybe try and turn into kind of like a marketing campaign.
Okay.
And then trying to just get some traffic on that and hopefully try to make some money off that. And then when we make at least enough money to at least try to go physical, then we'll go to physical.
Okay, good. So you are thinking through a lot of these things, right? And I don't know if you've done it explicitly or just sort of, kind of subconsciously almost in the step-by-step way to think it through. But you are trying to define your product and differentiate it. And you have to make sure that it's going to be a credible product, because if it's not credible, you can't sell it, at least not for very much. And so how are you going to go about doing that? Now, the next step, of course, is going to be, well, what's it cost? Even if you put it online, it's not free. And what's the price? Will people buy those books? Right? And if they're written by people who have good credentials, who have good reputation, then that solves a lot of those problems. Okay? Very good. So, you might want to go through, make these net income. How many books do you have to sell to break even? Okay? Yeah. So, take a stab at it and see what it comes up to, right? So, see if there's something that seems reasonable to you, and pass it by others in the industry who know who are familiar with these financials and might be able to tell you more if your numbers make sense. Thank you. Thanks for telling me that. Okay, so how are we doing on time?
You're good, yeah.
Okay. Somebody else? Yeah, let's think about it. I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes probably. Who else can give me an idea? Show and tell. Group sharing. Who's got a great idea? It's going to change the world. It's going to disrupt business. You guys see it? Watch Silicon Valley. That's what it's all about. Yeah.
We're working with Canopy Northwest Arkansas to provide better translation services for Canopy to use, as well as their surrounding primarily public service organizations that are legally required to provide those those services as well. And so for the immediate round of things, we're kind of looking to international grad students potentially
Okay.
that are bilingual and then could, potentially work out a little bit lower than typical market prices for virtual services just because they have a lower opportunity cost of time. And
Okay.
then as we grow, seeing how we could develop more virtual services possibly so other organizations that have the same type of problems can utilize that.
Okay, now is this a not-for-profit?
Yeah.
Okay, and so would you sell, will these translation services be sold to?
The translation services would, so
cities
that
or-
would be where the question of should Canopy run the project and use it as a moneymaker, where the proceeds then go into essentially giving them a credit to use translation services within their own organization,
Okay.
or if it should be a third-party organization that just has its setup goes back to benefit Canopy, whether with funds or just by saying you have a subsidized rate to use.
Okay, all right, very good. So yeah, it gets complex for a not-for-profit. The game is a little bit different because your objectives are different. You always have, you almost usually have a kind of a wider social objective, and it usually translates into less revenues, right? And so you're operating on a thinner margin, so you have to be more creative about how you solve some of these problems. Okay, good. And using grad students to help do some of that translation is a really good idea. It helps keep your costs down. And you get people who are native speakers, presumably, right? Or at least proficient. Okay, very good. Who else?
Are we allowed to ask questions?
Absolutely.
So in your cupcake example,
Mhm.
you projected 100 cupcakes the first year and 200 the second year.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, you have no idea how many you'll actually sell, right?
That's
So
correct.
How do you, I guess my question is, how do you eliminate that variability? Like, what can you do to make that closer to
Yeah.
accurate?
That's a really good question. I'll tell you, I would probably, if I were doing this for real, I would probably go to some of the big bakeries in the area and ask them to go back and tell me what their sales were like when they first started. To get some idea of how they started and how quickly they grew, right? How they distinguished themselves. I might look at some similar, I don't know, maybe some similar retail stores, whether they sell desserts or whatever, right? And try to get an idea of what their sales are. And probably in this if this were a real business, it wouldn't just be cupcakes, it'd be like a host of products, right? So then the question is, for this square footage that I'm thinking about renting, how much product can I put out? And what do similar stores with that kind of square footage, what's their revenue that they sell, that they generate in a particular day? So try to go look at real examples and make sure that I'm anywhere near on track. Is that bakery still open? What's it called? The one who does all the really fancy dessert bakery cupcakes. Bliss, right? Bliss? Go talk to them. They may not want to talk to me though. But go talk to them if they're willing and see what they do, right? So see how they are getting by. I don't know how much they sell their cupcakes for. Any idea? That's an easy thing to find out. You go in there, buy some cupcakes, and see how they taste and see how much they cost, right? See what the price is. And see what kind of cars they drive. So, so you can, you have to do a lot of investigation. It's hard work. It's educated guesses. And there's usually not a great source for the perfect information, so you just have to go do it yourself. But maybe you know a story of someone who failed. And boy, you can learn a lot. Most businesses fail, right? So you can learn a lot from those who fail as well. What other business ideas do we have? Who's struggling with something? Who's struggling with an idea right now, or with financing an idea? Or even how to think about financing an idea? You You guys all have it together, huh? We're gonna see when Deb grades your project.
I'll give them to you to grade.
Okay, well, any other comments, questions, anything? How many people thought that the cupcakes tasted like regular? Knocking free out. They're good, aren't they? I think most people would think that. Okay, well, I appreciate all of you.
Guys, we're not quite done yet. We have actually a second part of this presentation. Jessie Schneeblin is here from the Business Communications Center, and she's going to talk just briefly about grant writing. So I'm going to get her slides pulled up here, and she's going to get started. It's a short add-on to this, but it's a different way to think about financing a project.
Still. 9 cupcakes.
There you go.
Thank
Eat
you.
them all up.
So let's welcome Jessie. Thank you so
Hi.
much, Jessie.
Thank you, guys. How's it going? I have my notes because I actually wrote down a lot of stuff that he was talking about that's directly relevant to what we're about to talk about. So I might refer to them so we can draw some, I think, pretty obvious connections. So I'm Jessie Schneeblin from the Business Communication Lab. We're a writing and tutoring service center for all Walton students and all students who are taking a Walton class. Which means we can help and assist all of you. I've been working with the Social Innovation Challenge for a couple of semesters, and I want to talk to you about grant writing. So we're talking about how to make your projects financially viable, and we're also talking about how to fund your projects. So if you're looking for free money, grants are a place to really look. How many of you guys know what a grant is? Right? We've heard of grants. We know how they function. So I'm going to give a brief overview of what a grant is, how it works, and then why you might consider it for the work that you're currently doing. And I think the most important thing, too, is that you can see how a lot of the work that you're already doing can be easily adjusted if you start to strategically plan now to go ahead and apply for grants when this process is over. So a grant, for those of you who don't know, is a sum of money given by an organization, corporation, or government for specific purposes. So it's just money sitting there waiting to be given away, right? Just waiting to be given away. And these specific purposes are usually focused on some kind of impact. So each company, each organization, each corporation and government body is trying to create some kind of impact in a specific region or on a specific topic, and that's what the money is there for. So since all of your projects have a social impact element, almost most of your projects, and I've overviewed a lot of the projects that you're working on, there is some potential to fund some of your ideas through grant money. So my goal really is not to teach you how to write grants today. It's really just to plant a little seed of curiosity, and hopefully you will think about grants as you move along through this process. Because you don't have to fund your whole business, right? You can also fund pilot programs or specific technologies or materials. So while you may not fund your entire, I'll use Charles' project as an example, right? You may not be able to fund your entire book publication from beginning to end, but you may be able to find some seed money to develop maybe some materials, right? Some whatever it might take to print the books on your own, right? So you can find corporations or organizations that might have an interest. You said diversity and inclusion, might have a focus on diversity and inclusion. So it's really about the specific purposes that they have and how closely your goals or your social impact aligns with that particular organization. Sounds familiar, right? We know this about grants. Okay. I don't know what your knowledge is on grants, so I want to be, I want to give a broad overview, but I also want to get really specific. So everything that he just mentioned, all the work that you're going to do with your financials, all the work that you're already doing with your organizations are components of a grant, right? They're components of grants. So for example, this is a general outline of almost every grant that you'll see. They have these components, right? They have a executive summary, a personnel and building detail, a duties, timeline, schedule, an evaluation plan, a budget, and a budget narrative. They have all these components. And you're going to be working on all these components throughout the process. So the first one, local context, is the need. Right? You talked about market need. What gap is your particular project or business filling? Right? Where's the need? Why do we need this? Right? That's a component of a grant, right? Also, an executive summary. How many of you guys have written an executive summary at some point? Most of you, right? All grants have an executive summary. But more importantly, if you are working on presenting your project, you're going to have to learn how to articulate effectively all of the elements of your project to a general and a specific audience, right? You're going to have to know the components of your project. You're going to have to know who it impacts, why we're creating this impact, what the problem is. You're going to have to articulate all of this in your project. So you're kind of already focusing on the executive summary portion. Grants also have a personnel and building details section. Where's the labor going to come from, right? Is it going to be paid labor? Is it volunteers? Who's going to work and for how much? Who's going to pay them? Where does the money come from? Do you have to pay rent? Is somebody volunteering the space? Does the space already exist? All of these questions that you have to answer in your project, you also have to answer in a grant, right? So it's work that you're already doing. I'm going to say that phrase a lot, right? It's work that you're already doing. It has a duties schedule and a timeline. Who's going to do what and when? Is there a director? Who's going to organize, events if events have to be organized? And then again, who will pay those people, right? How long will it take? Right? How long will this process take from beginning to end? How long will the project take? If you're impacting or doing events, how often? These are questions that they'll ask. And then what is the evaluation plan? Which means how will you measure success? Right? How will we know that the problem or the solution that you've created, or the solution that you've developed, how will we know that it's successful? Right? How will you measure that? So that's also what a grant will ask you to kind of explain to them. These are all things that you're currently doing. A budget and a budget narrative. All those financials that he just walked you through, all of those things you'll already have. So you put it in a spreadsheet and that's your budget, right? But you also have to think about other things like what kind of materials. If you're doing like a community art project, you have to think about things like paint supplies, transportation. If you're driving people back and forth, whose transportation, who's going to drive the car, is that person going to be paid, right? Every single cost has to be in your budget, and then you have to have an explanation for it. So if you have, if you're working with like coding, and you have to have laptops for students, right? That's a cost that you would have to identify in your budget or your budget narrative. So these are all just general grant components. Some grants will have different components. Some will add or take away to some of this. But what you need to know is that you'll be asked to explain your project, explain the need, and then explain how your project or your social impact aligns with the organization's mission and values. So we know what a grant is, we know what it looks like, we know what the components are, and this is where and how you can look. And there are a couple of websites that I'll tell you about and some resources that you can utilize. But the first thing you need to know is that you need to seek funders whose mission and goals align with your own. So if you have a social, you all have a social impact element, who is it impacting? Right? And is that impact regional? Right? Are you working with students? Are you working with refugees? Charles, who do you hope to impact with your project? Can I call you out?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Right now, I'm just targeting Northwest Arkansas. Northwest
Okay.
Arkansas is not really diverse in terms of the rest of the United States.
Okay.
So, so here.
Okay. Who else? Like, what other kind of impact? Who are we trying to impact? We already know refugees with Canopy, right? What other projects? What other impacts are you trying to create? Like, who are you impacting? Yeah.
My group's working with the Northwest Arkansas Food Bank,
Okay.
and so we're trying to minimize food waste and also try to get food into the hands of the people who need it, so more like the homeless community.
Okay. the homeless community, people who are suffering, excuse me, my throat's very dry. I've been talking all day. Yeah. The homeless population, is anybody working with student populations?
For our, the Homegrown Music Festival, we're just trying to reach out to a younger crowd. So
Okay. So there are lots of organizations and corporations and foundations and grant makers who have very specific focuses, right? So some of them will focus on a specific region. So how many of you guys have heard of the Walton Family Foundation? Most of you, right? Walton Family Foundation has a specific focus in the Delta region, right? So if you're looking to pilot a program or a project there, you can think about aligning projects with specific foundations. I wouldn't change projects too much, but as you start to work through some of these things, if you find that you have some grants that you've seen that might seem really interesting to you, one of the things that you can do is think about when you start it initially, maybe you can pilot in a specific area or with a specific population, and create like a more narrow focus. So for example, if you're working with food insecurity, maybe you find a grant that cares about food insecurity, or it's part of their mission and goals, but they focus specifically with children in Arkansas, right? So you can kind of think about what does the organization care about, right? What is their mission? What is their goal? What do they value? And then who am I trying to impact, and how does that align with their value, right? And you can do that through a lot of easy research, and I'll show you how to do that. But the second thing you can do when you're looking is use your resources. All of your professors have applied, most of your professors have applied or received grants. People that you're working with, your community partners, your nonprofit organizations that you're working with, even company corporation board members, a lot of them have worked with grants or grant makers, or their companies or grant makers. So you can connect with people and talk to people and let them know that that's what you're interested in. And you can kind of build partnerships that way, and people, based on the type of organization that you're a part of, can kind of direct you in those directions of what kind of grants you can apply for. You can also, one of the things that I would suggest doing if you're working with these organizations who have a lot of grant experience, Canopy, I know Emily at Canopy has written and received grants. So if you think about the people that you're connecting with, you can also ask them for like tips or information about how to apply for grants and what the best practices might be. But you'll also have to do a lot of research. How many of you guys like writing? This is the response I get every time. No one likes writing. A couple of you, right? But if you conduct your research, grant making is really all about framing your project in a certain way, right? It's about persuasive writing. So why is your project the best project, and how does it align with the company's or organization's mission and goals? That's really what you're trying to do, is persuade that grant maker into funding a project because it creates the same kind of social impact that they want to create. That's really what it's about, is aligning yourself. So you'll have to conduct a lot of research, which is really easy to do. If you want to look for grants, you can just Google grants, right? That's the first thing you can do, right? It's not the best method, but if you Google, for example, and I did some Google practicing before this just to give you some ideas. If you Google like Northwest Arkansas grants, you can just find all these grant makers in Northwest Arkansas. So the Walton Family Foundation, for example, you can't apply for their grants because they only take certain kinds of grants. So they're not really a viable option for your projects. But there are lots of other grant makers around this area who are. The Tyson Foundation suspended their grants temporarily, but they're picking it back up in 2019. So when you're thinking about grants, it's not just nonprofits or government grants. A lot of corporations or larger companies have foundations. So if you're interested in a company, or you're working with this, like if you're working in retail, if you're working in supply chain, if you're working in like food waste, you can research some of these companies, and they're also looking to have a social impact. So they have a grant component or a foundation component to their corporation. So that's one area you can also look. You can also talk to your librarian. Since most of you guys are Walton students, I'm sure you've met or seen Jonathan Torres at some point. If you don't know who he is, he's the Walton Business Librarian. And you can also talk to your, and every discipline has a librarian at the University of Arkansas Library. and they can talk you through which databases to research for specific grants. So if you're working on if you're in biology, if you're in journalism, whatever you might be in, you have a librarian who can connect you to where you should start searching for grants. And there's also government grants. It's a little bit harder to get because you have to. One thing that Professor Yeager was talking about was this idea of control over your project and your business. Usually when you're working with government grants, you're going to have to adhere to a lot of specific regulations. You do have to report to people when you receive grants, but it's not that big of a deal because you're already kind of working through the social impact processes. You have the same mission and the same goals if you've applied to the right grants. So it'll be like a really great fit, a really great relationship. So when you leave here, what you can think about regarding grant writing is to start writing right now. Right? As you're thinking about your projects and you're forming your financials and you're thinking about your budget, start making short little paragraphs or short notes on how your project works, who it impacts and why. If you start writing now, writing a grant later, if you find one that you can apply for, is not going to be a really long process. It'll still be a process that requires research and work, but you won't be starting from scratch. The second thing you can do is consider qualitative and quantitative data. It's important to have numbers, but it's also important to tell stories. So while you can tell grant makers how many people you want to impact, so you want to impact 1,000 people a month, right? Sometimes it's much more effective to tell a story about how you impacted one person, the effect that it had on that one person, and then how your project or your impact is going to create that impact for 1,000 people. Does that make sense? So it's also about having qualitative data, not just quantitative. You want numbers and you also want real life experiences. That won't be applicable to every project, obviously, but if you get a chance to tell stories and talk about impact, it's a really good idea to do so. So for example, if you're working with Canopy, one thing you could do would be to demonstrate how that translation technology would work for one person, right? Tell the story of how it impacted one person or could impact one person. Or if you're identifying the problem, you could talk about the difficulties that one person had without that translation, software technology, whatever the solution might be. And then you can talk about the number of refugees that would help. So that's really the difference between qualitative and quantitative. So you can think about those things early. And the last thing is to network, right? You guys are meeting some really awesome people right now. You've met companies and community partners. So make connections with them, because even if you don't, work with the project forever, it doesn't become implemented, you can always kind of touch base with those people for future projects. You can also find a lot of great grant resources and seed money resources through your networking. The last thing I want to mention is that you can also come to our office as you begin writing your grants. If you're a Walton student or taking a Walton class and you're working on these projects, if you're interested in grants, one, you can pop by our office and we can talk about it. But two, if you start to be interested in writing one, we can talk before you start writing on how to strategically frame your project to meet that particular company's mission and goals. So that's a little bit about grant writing. Does anyone have any questions about this process? Okay, awesome. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, man, I had to let the other guy go.
You're good.
Irrational kind of crazy. Yeah, so like.
It's gonna make it a lot harder.
Oh, yeah. That would be a good idea.
I did that like social.
Yeah, you should.
Canvas thing, and I assessment thing on that software. Yeah.
Oh, I did. Sorry.
I didn't.
If I would've known, I would've told you to do with this.
I should have, but like it was already like kind of late in there.